Brent's back there telling me to turn my mic on. Okay, so we're good now. Okay. For those of you online, you didn't miss anything. Okay, but our goal is to get to the original intent of the biblical author. But let's do a quick recap. And so go back with me to Genesis 1. So if you're just showing up here tonight for the first time, you'll get a quick recap and a chance to ask any questions you may have. Fear not, though, because tonight we're going to go just over those really 4 to 8 verses or so. And then next week we're going to knock out a pretty big chunk because there's a narrative that takes up a few chapters known as the flood. So we're going to go over that next week. But tonight mainly just chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Before we start, though, let's pray, and then we'll dive into the Bible. Father, thank you for your word. I pray tonight that we would humble ourselves before your word. We know it's profitable for teaching, for rebuking, for correction, for training in righteousness. And so, Lord, I pray that we would come before your word with humility, knowing that your word is inerrant. We are not inerrant. We are flawed individuals. We believe things sometimes that are wrong. And so, Father, we want to do the best we can tonight to understand what your word says, to allow that to form our beliefs and to influence our behaviors. I pray your blessing over every person here tonight, that, Lord, they would just be hungry for your word, that all of us would be hungry for your word, and some very interesting passages we're going to be looking at tonight. And so, Lord, pray that you would grant us wisdom. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so going back to Genesis chapter 1, and we've said that verse 1 operates kind of like a what? It's it's a literary introduction. It kind of serves as a title for what's about to happen. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Do you know, I spoke at chapel at CTCS today, and I asked them to stand up and say memory verses. And, you know, John 3:16, and these kids were standing up and saying some great verses. And my son raised his hand, so, of course, I called on him, and he said, Genesis 1:1. And I said, okay. And he said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I was like, well, that was kind of an easy one. But anyway, so it is a literary introduction. It's saying this is what is about to be described. It is the creation of the heavens and the earth. You begin verse 2. You've got the backdrop. You've got the blank slate, which is going to come, by the way, which is going to come in very, it's going to be very important for our discussion next week when we talk about the flood. But verse 2, now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. The Spirit of God was hovering over the water. So this is the blank canvas upon which God begins to paint. And you see days 1 through 3, he creates and forms habitations, these spaces, and sets things in motion. He calls the light day. So he created the basis for time on day 1. On day 2, he created the basis for weather. You've got the waters being separated, the sky above, the waters below. Day 3, the basis for food is created. And then he begins to fill those spaces with what we might call functionaries, what creatures or things are going to function in those spaces. So on day 4, you've got the greater light and the lesser light. We've noted that word light is also used for the menorah lamp in the tabernacle. So kind of the first indication in the Bible that what's going on here is God's creating a space not just for humans to dwell, but for himself to dwell. And so the greater light governs the day, the lesser light governs the night. Day 5, you've got the creation of the sea creatures and the birds of the sky. And so he fills those spaces that he created on day 2. And then finally on day 6, just like day 3, you've got 2 acts of creation. On day 6, and by the way, each act of creation begins with what phrase? And God said, and God said, and God said. On days 3 and 6, you've got 2 and God saids. And so on day 6, he creates the land creatures to fill the space that he created on day 3. And the pinnacle of his creation, he creates Adam. He creates humankind. male and female, in his own image. And he blesses them and says in verse 28, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds in the sky, over every living creature that moves on the ground." So everything that was created on days 1 through 6.5, Adam, humankind, is to rule over. And that's the climactic point of creation. Then on day 7, God rests. And we said it's not just that he stopped doing work, it's that he actually comes to rest and dwell. That's how they would have understood it. He would have come to rest and dwell in his creation. Any questions about Genesis chapter 1? Okay. So 3 different options. Option number 1 is that he's referring to the Trinity, let us, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Option number 2, it's a rhetorical device where he's just saying, kind of like, let's get some pizza. And, we say that, and we don't mean let's everybody in this room go get pizza. We just mean that somebody's going to go get it, and I'll go get it. So it could be a rhetorical device. Or number 3, he's referring to the divine council, to the heavenly assembly. And I said that on week 1, I said probably that's the heavenly assembly he's talking about. We're actually going to talk a lot about that tonight, because the original audience, remember, if we're thinking about the original audience, the doctrine of the Trinity was developed throughout the course of the Scriptures, okay? And it doesn't become obvious until the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. So that's probably not what it meant. Could be a rhetorical device, but how did they understand it? I think they would have understood it as him speaking to the divine assembly, like what we see in Job 1, 2 Kings 22, some other places where God's on his throne. He's in his throne room. The heavenly hosts are gathered around. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight. Questions, comments? All right, so Genesis 1, fairly, it's kind of a 30,000-foot view, so to speak, very general in terms of what's going on. Not really a storyline in Genesis 1. It functions more like a historical psalm where you're going back, you're dealing with things that have happened, but using beautiful language to describe all the things that have happened. But in Genesis 2, it hones in on the story of Adam and Eve, and particularly the first man, the first woman. And we talked through that narrative that verse 5, no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground. So we talked about either this is recapitulation where it's kind of zooming in on day 6, or this is a sequel which is taking place somewhere after Genesis 1. I said it's probably a sequel and so forth, but who knows? We can debate on that. But the interesting part here is no shrub had appeared in the field. Why? Because it hadn't rained, and there's nobody, no human to work the ground, okay? And so we say, well, God creates through his word, and God said, and God said, and God said, but the Bible doesn't go into a ton of detail what that actually entails, what that actually looks like. In Genesis 2, we get a picture of, hey, there's no shrub, because why? There's no rain. There's nobody work the ground. That seems like when I go out and I'm working in my yard, that doesn't seem like a very supernatural process to me. And yet, they would have understood God working through that, and God is bringing things into existence. But he has planted this garden in Eden. And through my skillful artistry, we've talked about there's Eden. We've talked about there's a garden in Eden. I've drawn this 3 weeks in a row now, so I'm very proud of this picture that I've drawn. It's got 2 trees in there somewhere. But we've got Eden, which is a region, and then we've got a garden in Eden, and we've got God putting a word connected with rest, putting to rest. He's coming to rest, or kind of taking up his place in the Garden of Eden, Adam, and what's he supposed to do? Work and till the ground, and those are words that can relate to agriculture, and I think it is relevant to that here, but also is used of priests in the temple doing their job, where they're guarding the temple. Part of what they're supposed to do is guard this sacred space. What were they supposed to do with the temple and the tabernacle? The closer you get to that most holy place, it's guarded. And even when you get in there, there's cherubim guarding it. And once they get kicked out of here, what do we have standing at the gate in the east? Cherubim or seraphim, I can't remember which one. They're guarding the sacred space, something that Adam and Eve were supposed to do themselves. So this takes place, it's not good for Adam to be alone. It's not good for, and I say Adam like that because that's literally the Hebrew name, which we talked about all the different meanings of that, but not good for the man to be alone, and so a suitable helper is made for him, an Ezer Kenegdo. Ezer Kenegdo, which we talked at length about, this is like an ally, someone who comes alongside you to help you fulfill a task that you cannot fulfill on your own. You need help, and men can't fulfill the task on their own. Women can't fulfill the task on their own. No one human being can fulfill God's task on their own. We need one another, and we are created to operate and to function with one another. That's the beauty of a church. There are things that I'm gifted in and that I feel real strong in doing, teaching, preaching, things like that. There are other things that I am so incredibly grateful that we have other people in the church that are gifted in that, and they can do that, because we'd be in a mess in a hurry if I had to have direct oversight of whatever I'm talking about. Like, for example, cooking tonight. Y'all probably wouldn't be here, right? Okay, we'd have a very small menu range of options. But okay, so that's Genesis 2. Any questions about Genesis 2? And by the way, when woman is created, he breaks into song. This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. She shall be called Isha, because she was taken out of Ish. Any questions about Genesis 2? All right, Genesis 3. The rebellion, the fall, the serpent. Keep in mind, now we have in Genesis 3 a serpent. Who is the serpent? The devil, okay, the evil one, the Satan. I say the Satan because Satan's not actually a name. It's a description. The Satan, not advocate, adversary. Okay, the adversary, the Satan is our adversary, the one who opposes us. And we would say that the serpent is kind of a manifestation of the Satan, of the evil one, and a spiritual being, a divine being, who now is having a conversation with the woman. And they get into this conversation. He tempts her. She eats of the forbidden fruit that God commanded them not to eat. Adam's there with her. She hands some to her husband. They both sin, and they immediately feel shame. Chapter 2 ends with them being naked and not ashamed. In chapter 3, now they are ashamed, and so they go and they clothe themselves. God is walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Again, now who knows what exactly this means, okay? We know that it means that God was present. We know that it means that God was there, that God was looking for them. But one of the basic questions we'd say is that God is spirit and does not have a body like human beings. And so to speak of God walking, does that mean that he took on human form? Is that just a figure of speech? And what is going on here? What does it mean? And I think there could be some debate either way on that. But the point is, God is present, and he's looking for Adam and Eve, and he says, basically, where are you? And it's not because God doesn't know something, okay? God's not wondering where anybody is right now, right? He knows where you are. He knows where I am. He knew where Adam and Eve was. But this is a way to start a conversation with them, and And so he begins to have conversation with Adam, and then with Eve, and then with the serpent. And then that order reverses where the serpent is cursed, okay? And I want you to notice chapter 3, verse 15, very important verse in the Bible. And I will put enmity between you and the woman. Who? Between the serpent and the woman. Between your offspring and hers. And he will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Between your offspring. Interesting. So, does that mean that we are warring with snakes today? Some of us are like, all the time. You know, one of the nastiest things that ever happened to me on social media was one time I killed a good snake. And I didn't know it was a good snake at the time, but I quickly found out when it was posted on social media that this had happened. And all of a sudden I thought, man, if we had this much passion about some other things, we would really be okay. But anyway, so no, we're not fighting with snakes. We're talking about the offspring of the evil one. Okay, so we might think of spiritual forces. We might think of demonic. I would say things like Hamas. I would say if you go to Revelation, you talk about the beast and these demonic forces behind the kingdoms of this world. Okay, and so you can go from Genesis all the way to Revelation, and you can see where there are these demonic forces at war with human beings. Okay? Keep that in mind tonight. Okay, then there's the woman. Does not say he cursed the woman like it does the snake. It just says, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband. He will rule over you. So, of course, all of these are a frustration of the natural order. So just like the man, we're about to get to Adam. And what's the struggle with Adam? You're going to try to work the ground, but it's not going to produce fruit the way that you want it to. It's not going to yield a harvest the way that you want it to all the time. There's going to be frustration there. And so some very good things that you're going to set out to do in life are going to be frustrated because we live in a broken, fallen world due to human rebellion and sinfulness. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so it does not say directly that they're cursed, but it does say that they're dealing with the effects, the after effects of their sin. Yes, ma'am. The text doesn't really say anything about that, at least not in Genesis 3. And so, now some people want to, they'll go and they'll take 1 Timothy 2, they'll take some other places in the Bible, and they'll want to come and say that Eve is women in general are more easily deceived than men, and so that's why he approached Eve. The problem with that is you don't get that from the text itself, okay, in Genesis 3. Now, if I go to some other places, we could have a debate about that. I don't think women are more easily deceived than men. I don't think the Bible teaches that, although that was a common belief for most of church history, in fact. So the text doesn't say that, but since you brought that up, if you look at the order in which characters are presented in, well, I'm about to write Satan, but the serpent, okay, goes to the woman, then goes to the man. And then if you track it, God comes to the man, he goes to the woman, then he goes to the serpent. Okay? Then if you track it some more, the serpent is cursed, then he goes to the woman, and then he goes back to the man. And so, of course, we believe this is a historical account, but it's important how the biblical author arranges all of this. He has it almost in I don't know, we'd say a chiastic structure, but he has a literary structure that he presents it in. And so it fits for him to go to the woman there. And notice right in the middle of all of it, there's a woman. It's interesting the way that unfolds. Well, I would say both are the guilty party, right? I'd say both are the guilty party. So, so I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I don't think the text entertains the idea as to the motivation of the serpent, why he went to. Some might speculate and say, well, because God directly instructed the man, and the man was supposed to instruct the woman, and so maybe the serpent knew that she hadn't been properly instructed or something like that. But we don't know. We would be speculating. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about that. And this is interesting because there's two different views on this. One, or three different views on this. One means that this is an oppressive rule, okay? That the husband is oppressively, that the outcome of the fall is that there are going to be situations where husbands are oppressive rulers over their wives. Problem with that is the Hebrew word mashal doesn't mean oppressive rule. It just means rule, okay? So it can't mean, I don't believe it can mean that. Well, govern or something like that. And I don't believe that it means oppressive rule because just a couple of chapters before that, the greater light will mashal over the day, the lesser light will mashal over the night. And we've kind of joked about this, that maybe only in Texas does the sun have an oppressive rule in the day. But it's just the general word for rule. Another thought is that the wife is going to be contrary to her husband. She's going to be in disagreement with her husband. And so he's going to have to rule over her to keep her in line, so to speak. And so that's a view that some people have, okay? It's not a view that I have. I believe that God is just describing the outcome of the fall, which is that because this happened, now men are going to rule over women. It's not to say this is going to be an ideal situation, okay? Anything you see, like when women go to pain in childbirth, that's not a consequence of the fall that we want to enforce. When a woman's having a child, we don't say, sorry, honey, you can't have an epidural because of Genesis 3:16, right? And if you do, then just make sure that I'm not in the room visiting and praying over your wife during that moment. But so I don't think this is something to be enforced. I think God's just describing, hey, this is the way the world's going to be now that this has happened. And that's certainly an accurate description of human history. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I don't know that I share the view that women are always a problem. I would share the view that humans are always a problem. Well, sure, but we could go down the line and show a bunch of men who do a lot of bad stuff as well, and even the great ones, Noah, okay, even people like Samuel. But we could also go and we show a lot of good things that men have done and that women have done. I mean, you've got Deborah, you've got Huldah, you've got Esther. You've got so many examples in the Old Testament of women filling that role in a very redemptive way, and it's celebrated and commendable. Yes, sir. Yeah. 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 Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And and I would say that's probably the second view where women are going to act contrary to their husband, and that's going to necessitate them needing to rule over them. And so, and that's possible. That's a legitimate interpretation of the passage. It's not the one that I take. Yeah. 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 Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Sure. I'm with you. I'm with you. No, no, you're good. You're good. Um, do what? Do what? Well, I think he saw. I mean, he's the one that wrote it, and so I think he saw it as just like he saw pain in childbirth, just like he saw thorns and thistles. It's a natural consequence of the rebellion that this is the dynamic that will take place. Now, let me say this. I'm trying to get to Genesis 6 tonight, so I'm because I'm going to skip Genesis 4 and number on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days are 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that are moving along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And aren't you so thankful for verse 8? Okay, well, let's begin to break this down verse by verse. Verse 6, when human beings began to increase in number, guess what Hebrew word is for human beings there? Adam. There it is, right there. That's important because how many of you have a translation that says man? Okay, that impacts how you're going to read this, as we'll see. And I've had those kind of translations as well, and I'm going to disagree with the NIV on some stuff tonight as well. But when human beings began to increase, so this is just a reference to humankind, but it says, and daughters were born to them. Daughters were born to who? To human beings, okay? So talking about the expansion right now of the human population. And then, of course, we all know what verse 2 means, right? The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Okay, so there are 3 views on this, okay? Number 1 is what's called the Sethite view. Okay, the Sethite view, and we're going to go over each of these in detail, but just generally speaking, some would say that the sons of God refer to those in the line of Seth, the godly line of Seth, okay? So that's one view. Another view, human human rulers. Okay? That word is human. I should have just wrote a dom. I'm getting better at writing that than human. Anyway, human rulers. Okay? And so some would say that the sons of God are kings or tyrants or men of high social status, maybe even from the line of Cain. Okay? Then number 3 option is divine being or angels. Okay? And I say divine being because when you hear angel, we just kind of have a fixed idea of what that means. In the Bible, angels, there's actually a hierarchy, which is why you have archangels and just regular angels. And angel just literally means messenger, just a little messenger person, an angel. But there's cherubim, there's seraphim, there's all kinds of different levels of angelic beings. So that's why, just generally speaking, I say divine being as a third option. And so this would believe this is a group from the angelic beings who intermarried or at least had intercourse with the daughters of humans. Okay, well, which one is it? Okay, and so let's begin to break this down and look at what this is. Probably the most popular view today, and I say on a popular level. I don't know that this is true on a scholarly level, but I think it's probably true on a popular level. And what I've seen over the years is there's often a divide between what people embrace on a popular level and what's embraced on more of an academic level. On a popular level, a lot of people would take the Sethite view. And this would say, again, that men from the godly line of Seth are the sons of God, that they are human beings from the line of Seth. And this passage describes the forbidden intermarriage between the godly line of Seth and the ungodly women from Cain's line. Men, as it says there at the end of chapter 4, called on the name of the Lord. This is the godly line of Seth that's calling upon the name of the Lord, but now they've intermarried with the line of Cain. And this rebellion is what brought about the flood. Okay, so that would be what this view says. Did you have something you were going to say? Oh, okay. You just looked like you had something you were about to share with us. All right. So, why do they believe this? Where does this interpretation come from? Some of you may believe this, and you're welcome to chime in if I don't cover all the points. A couple of main things is that Genesis 4 and 5, what is Genesis 4 and 5 dealing with? The line of Cain and the line of Seth. Okay, and so they would say, see, the context of Genesis 6 is dealing with Seth and Cain, so that's the contextual evidence there. And then number 2, while there's no places in Scripture that men are called exactly the phrase used here, sons of God, there are places where it gets close to this description. Deuteronomy chapter 14. I won't write all these. I'll just say it to you. You can write it down. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 1 refers to the sons of Yahweh, your God. Okay? And there's this word, ben. Okay? Ben, son. And that word's used there. Used again in Deuteronomy 32:5, referring to his sons, the sons of God, but it just says his sons. Okay, Psalm 73:15 talks about your children. Okay, God's children. That's a common phrase, of course, in the Bible. In Hosea 1:10, this is probably as close as it gets, talks about the sons of the living God. The sons of the living God. And it, again, uses that word ben, as is found in Genesis 6. So, a lot of people think that the Sethite view is the right way to go. A few problems with this view. Number 1, it never says in Genesis 4:26, when it says people called upon the name of the Lord, it never says that it's just from the line of Seth. It never makes that indication. It's just a general statement that says people were calling upon the name of the Lord. with this view, the Nephilim kind of remain unexplained. It's not a really good explanation of what on earth we're talking about with the Nephilim. The women in this passage, you'll notice, are never called daughters of Cain. They're specifically called daughters of Adam, daughters of humankind, of humans, which would seem to separate them. Anyway, we'll get to that later. But daughters of Cain is not actually mentioned. Number 4, there's not a single command regarding a prohibition against marriages between the line of Cain and the line of Seth. So you might assume that. You might think that that's part of the picture here, and it's implied somewhere, but it's never actually explicitly mentioned. Number 5, and I say number 5, whatever number you're on. Nowhere in the Bible is that phrase, sons of God, identified with the line of Seth, and that exact phrase is not identified with human beings. Okay, now we'd all say we're sons and daughters of God, okay? That's not what I'm talking about, but we're going to see here in a minute there's an exact phrase that's used there that's never used of humans in the Bible. And the New Testament authors were completely unaware of this viewpoint, which is why one of the reasons I don't. You say, which one do you take? Not this one, okay? I don't take that one. And it's because I don't think something is likely to be the right interpretation that didn't really come into its own until after the New Testament was written, okay? Questions, comments about that? Because for all I know, most of you, if not all of you, may believe that view. So who knows? Feel free to ask questions. Yes, sir. Right, yeah. 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 Sure. Right. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's no prohibition, and so it wouldn't be clear what they did wrong at that point because that's not something brought out in the text itself. Number 2 is the human ruler view, which again is the view that sons of God refers to kings or tyrants of men of high social status, maybe even from the line of Cain. Some evidence for this view would be that some read in Psalm 82:6. I might just turn there real quick. We're going to be coming back here a little bit later for a different reason. Psalm 82:6, where he said, I say you are gods, you are all sons of the Most High. They believe that that's in reference to human beings, specifically to kings. And so they read Genesis 6 through the lens of Psalm 82. Number 2, there are passages in the Old Testament where humans are referred to as sons, and so they claim this is consistent with some of the other ancient. Remember, when we talked about the image of God, we said that in other ancient religions that they just referred to kings as the image bearers, and that really the Hebrew Bible, Genesis, is a polemic against that, arguing against that no, not just kings, but all human beings are created in the image of God. But some would say, but there is some language that's kind of influenced by some of those factors in the Old Testament where it seems to refer to kings as being a god or something, a son of God or something like that. Psalm 2:7, which is a messianic psalm. Some might point to Exodus 4:23. They believe that there's places in the Bible where this kind of thing's going on. So that they'd present that as evidence. Number 3, the marriages were wrong, they would say, because they're polygamous. Notice what it says here. It says that they married, or literally they took. And I don't really like the word married. It could mean married, but literally it's just took any of them they chose. Okay? And so they would say that this is polygamy. Okay? And the problem with that is that all through the Old Testament, we believe that marriage is monogamous, and we believe that the Bible teaches that in the Old Testament and New Testament. But one thing that we find out very quickly as we read the Old Testament is folks like Solomon seemed to go along quite nicely in Israel and get along with everybody. And he had more than one, more than two, just keep going, and we don't have time tonight to count them all up. And so that was a fairly common practice. So some would make an argument against that. But that they would present that as part of the argument. Number 4 would be that some ancient translations around the 2nd century translate sons of God as sons of nobles or sons of kings. And so going back to about the 2nd century, you've got some text that's translating the Old Testament and says sons of kings or sons of nobles, and so they would bring that out as evidence. Okay, what do we say about this? I honestly don't think a very strong case can be made for this one, although it's certainly possible. The exact phrase "sons of God" again does not refer to kings in the Old Testament. So this exact phrase that we're going to be looking at tonight never refers to kings in the Old Testament. Any questions on that one? Number 3. Okay, we're at door number 3 here, and but any questions on number 2 while we're here? Yes, ma'am. Right, children of God. Absolutely. So that would probably fit more. Some people would probably try to line that up under number 1, but that's exactly right, that in the Bible we're called children of God. And so people take from that and they say, see here, this is just referring to men, to sons, actual human beings, sons of God, and that's what it's referring to. Okay, and that's possible. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so it's like we'd say that we are sons and daughters of God. If we just change one thing, if I just say one thing different, not that I'm a son of God, if I just say that I'm the Son of God, how does that work for us? Anybody on board with that? Just change one little word, okay? And so every word counts, and that's what we're about to see here in just a minute. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you for that. We're going to get to that. Yep. Yeah, we're going to get to that. Yep. That verse seems to dissuade a lot of people from taking option number 3. But it's kind of one of those things where I don't think any of us are going to go home tonight with 100% certainty on necessarily what we believe about this. But I'm going to send you home with a bunch of evidence, and you tell me if at the end of the night, if that one verse undoes everything else we talk about, okay? Okay, so I take number 3 to be the correct interpretation of it, which means that the sons of God are in reference to divine, heavenly, angelic beings. And why is that? Well, first, the Hebrew phrase, Ben Ha-Elohim, if you say that, at a dinner party or something, you'll sound really impressive, okay? Say that person knows Hebrew. And similar phrases are only used in the Old Testament of heavenly beings. This exact phrase, only used of heavenly beings. Let's look at some of them. Some are exact, some are close, but you'll get the idea. First, let's turn over to Job. Okay, the book of Job, chapter 1. Job, chapter 1, and I do not have, I have more of a thought-for-thought translation, so some of these I'll kind of fudge a little bit so we can get to the literal word. But in Job 1:6, it says, one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan also came with them. Now, who has something other than angels there? Well, but when the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, does anybody have a literal translation? It's the sons of God. Okay. Now, do you know which book in the Bible was written first? Job. Okay. Written about the same time as Genesis. Okay. Look at Job 2:1. On another day, the sons of God, the angels, came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord. Okay, again, sons of God. Who are the sons of God? NIV just does all the work for you. Angels, okay? It gets a little bit more clear when you go down to Job 38. Job 38, and we're going to come back to this a little bit later, but Job 38, verse 7, says, while the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. When is this? This is before, or this is actually during creation. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. What was going on before creation? Well, the sons of God, the angels were around. Okay, so they were there in creation, as we're going to talk about. But the sons of God, there's that phrase used again. Let's look at some other ones that are similar in Psalm 29. Psalm 29. And this is not exact phrasing, but it's close. Rather than Elohim, it's Elim. It says, ascribe to the Lord, you heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength, you heavenly beings. Or sons of God. Okay? Psalm 82:6. Psalm 82:6. We're going to come back to this again later, but you heard this earlier. I said, you are gods, you are sons of the Most High. You are sons of the Most High. But now look back at the beginning of Psalm 82. We said earlier, some people say that's humans, but look at the beginning of Psalm 82, God presides in the what? In the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. Now, we are monotheists in the sense that we believe that there's one true God, worthy of worship, worthy of praise. That does not mean that we believe that there's only one supernatural being, okay? Obviously. Satan is a supernatural being. The angels are supernatural beings. They are divine beings. And I believe that many of the nations that worshiped the gods were worshiping such supernatural beings that were fallen, okay? And so in heaven, Job 1, Isaiah 6, Revelation, throughout Revelation really, but Revelation 4 and 5, various places in the Bible, 2 Kings 22 especially, you get these depictions, these pictures of the great assembly, of the throne room. What's going on in heaven? Okay, we may want to go sit down in the White House or something like that, but imagine going to the throne room of God, central command of the universe. And he is seated there, and all of the depictions we have is he's not just sitting in a room by himself. What does he have gathered around? The cherubim and the seraphim and the angelic beings, the great council. And that's how they, throughout the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament as well, understood the throne room of God. God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. Let's keep going. So number one is that this phrase, and phrases close to this, but this phrase in particular is found only in reference to angels, angelic beings in the Old Testament. And there are other similar phrases to this that are clear references to angelic beings. So that's number one. So we might say reason number one is just the Hebrew Bible, okay, is the reason I believe that it's divine beings. Number two is the Septuagint. Because the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, translates Genesis 6, is it 2 or 3, where it says sons of God. 2 translates Genesis 6:2 as angels of God. Okay? So it kind of does what, remember when I read Job 1, it said angels in the NIV, it just kind of did the work for me. The Greek translation of the Old Testament, which was written before the days of Jesus, did that and just translated it angels of God. So number one is the Hebrew Bible. Number two is the Septuagint. Number three is Jewish literature. Jewish literature, such as First Enoch, the book of Jubilees, which were very popular among God's people. That it's not in the Bible, it's not inspired, it's not authoritative, but it formed their culture. It was part of their belief system, for sure. And without question, it translated that as angels. In fact, listen to this quote from 1 Enoch 6, 1 and 2. And if you have a problem with me quoting 1 Enoch, then you're probably going to have a problem with 2 Peter, and you're going to have a problem with Jude here in a little bit. 1 Enoch 6, 1 and 2, see if this sounds familiar. And it came to pass when the full and comely, number one, the Hebrew Bible, number two, the Septuagint, number three, Jewish literature and culture. It was the common belief there. And 1 Enoch, by the way, asserts that Noah's flood came to destroy the angelic human unions. Number four, Peter and Jude. Peter and Jude. So turn over to 2 Peter. 2 Peter. 2 Peter chapter 2. And let's see what he has to say. 2 Peter chapter 2. I'll just start reading at verse 4. He's talking about false teachers. But it says in 2 Peter 2:4, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others, if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And by the way, do you see a progression here? You see a progression here. He's following some kind of chronological order, so to speak. And so then he gets to Lot. If he rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by depraved conduct of the lawless. Verse 8, for that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. If this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and hold to these unrighteous for punishment on the day of judgment. This is especially true of those who follow the corrupt desire of the flesh and despise authority. Turn over to Jude. Jude, verse 5. Chapter 1, by the way. Jude, verse 5. Though you already know all this, I want to remind you that the Lord at one time delivered his people out of Egypt, but later destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. They serve as an example of those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. So in the same way. In the same way as what? In a similar way as what he just got finished talking about, those angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling. What on earth could he be talking about? Virtually, there's a consensus among scholars that 2 Peter 2 and Jude verses 5 through 7 are referring to the same incident. Okay? So, I believe the New Testament affirms this belief as well. Number 5, we might say Jewish tradition. Before the New Testament, everybody believed, throughout the New Testament era, this was the predominant view. It's not until the days of Augustine, that this began to shift from being the predominant view. Think about that. The days of Augustine. That's, I'm drawing a blank whether that was the 2nd or 4th century. I think it was the 4th century that Augustine comes around. And we just, quite frankly, a lot of times inherit beliefs and we just go with it. But it was Jewish tradition to believe something different. I don't know if he's the one who came up with it. I know he promoted the view. Or he promoted a view other than number 3. I want to say he did this one. Sethite. And then number 6, the context of Genesis 6. What's that war going to be in Genesis 3:15? Between the offspring of the serpent and the offspring of the woman. And is the offspring just going to be other snakes, or is it going to be perhaps these kind of spiritual beings? So that's a possibility as well. Now, there's one verse, we're going to do this and very quickly wrap it up by talking about the Nephilim. There's one verse that stands in the way, and that's Matthew 22:30, which says that angels neither marry or are given in marriage. And so some say, we'll see right there, that makes this interpretation impossible. And I would say, no, to me it actually confirms this interpretation, because the whole point is they're not supposed to do that. Okay? Angels are not supposed to marry or be given in marriage. And that's also why I said in Genesis 6, 2, I don't like the word married as much as I like just the literal phrase took for themselves. Okay, the sons of God came and they took daughters of Adam, daughters of humankind for themselves. Matthew 22:30. All right, now normally I would open it up for questions. We're already past time, so I'm going to very quickly get through the Nephilim, and then I'll open it up, and that way if anybody needs to leave or whatever, go slash the tires on my car or whatever, you can go do that. All right, so let's get to verse 3, all the way back in Genesis 6, verse 3. it says, then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. There are days where I've had that thought as well. So what does this mean? Some would say 120 years is referring to the amount of time before the judgment, before the flood. But probably, I believe it means, it's just a general phrase for they're going to have a limited lifespan, okay? Referring to their lifespan. Now, obviously, we don't live to be, and some do, and some, I think, have hit beyond that. But it's just a general rule that, you know, you got that genealogy earlier where people like Jared lived to be 962 years, okay? I'm probably not going to hit that mark like the Jared in Genesis 5 did, okay? There's a limit, there's a ceiling, and so I think that's what it's probably referring to. But let's get to 6:4 because everybody knows who the Nephilim are. The Nephilim. By the way, this is not a translation, that's a transliteration. That's just straight from the Hebrew because, you know why? Nobody really fully knows what it means or what it is. It's only found here and in Numbers somewhere, Numbers 13, I think. I'll get that to you here in a minute. But some would say it's either heroic warriors or quasi-divine offspring. Those are the two main options, heroic warriors or quasi-divine offspring. This is not an ethnic designation. Not an ethnic designation. One of the best ways you can know that is because they appear after the flood. Where do they come from if it's an ethnic designation? Okay, so, all right, so which one is it, heroic warriors or quasi-divine offspring? We already know what I'm going to say, but let's look at the first one. Some would say it's from the Hebrew word naphal, N-A-P-H-A-L, which means fallen ones. And they would just say that, you know, and you got if you believe in either one of these two views, you got to come up with something for the Nephilim, okay? And really the best you can come up with is that they're warriors, they are heroes or great men, as it says here in the text, and so that's just all it means. And there's nothing special about them. They're not any different than anybody else. They're just, you know, great men, as it says there. For option number 2, I would say this. If you look in Numbers 13:33, the context there is talking about giants. Giants. And we know, obviously, from David and Goliath, there were giants in the Old Testament, okay? So we're not making stuff up. But in Numbers 13:33, it kind of has that grammatical context. It's interesting, one scholar, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, definitely not an Aramaic scholar, but one scholar did a study on this. The Aramaic word for giant is well, I'll just spell it because I've got a better shot. Make sure I spell it right. Okay, that's the word for giant in Aramaic. Okay? It's the word for giant in Aramaic. If you make the word plural, okay, so you move it over to Hebrew, and it's kind of like we being close to the border, we'll take some words and kind of give our own Texas fling to it, right? And kind of adapt it. If you take that Aramaic word in Hebrew, which is very closely related, and you make it plural, this is how it's spelled. Make sure I get it right here. Thank you. We have an Aramaic scholar among us, folks. There you go. So there's the difference, which this just so happens, from what I understand, to be the exact way it's spelled in Numbers 13:33, which this word, again, means giant in Aramaic. Okay? So I think it's probably... No, I'm talking about the Hebrew, okay? In our version, it's going to say the exact same, okay? So, and I can check it on this after we're over to take a look at it. So after it's over, we'll take a look at it to make sure, and hopefully it bears that out. But, yeah, so he makes the case that this is what it's spelled like in Aramaic for giant, and if it's over into Hebrew and you make it plural, this is what it looks like, which the claim is that's what it looks like in Numbers 13. So we'll double check that. For me, it's just the context of if you're telling a story and if sons of God, the evidence for me seems to strongly lean towards this view, and it makes perfect sense that their offspring would be Nephilim, giants, or some kind of mighty men that would be a little bit different than everybody else. Okay, I've actually got like 2 more pages, but we'll cut it off right there, all right? So I'll open it up for questions. If you got questions, feel free to ask. If you need to leave, totally understand. Yes, sir. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why we have to be careful to be too rigid with it. I think it's just an assertion of our mortality. We are, as it says, my spirit will not contend with humans forever. They are literally flesh, okay, flesh, and their days will be 120 years. And so I think it's just a general statement of our human mortality that without God's intervention, there will come a point where we die, and so I think God's just making that clear. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and that's why I think we have to be careful to make it too rigid, because 70 would be a biblical number that would often just refer to a number of completion or fullness. You get to Revelation, if you start taking numbers all literally, then you really come up with a mess. And that's true throughout the Bible. It's a way to refer to fullness, to completion. And so if we took both of those just rigidly, okay, then we'd have a real problem on our hands, right? We'd have the Bible warring against itself. And I promise you, they would